rest of the news. Donald Trump will not run as a third-party candidate and has signed the Republican Party's loyalty oath. Politico broke the news earlier this morning, and then Trump made it official later on this afternoon by signing that pledge, which, by the way, is not legally binding, signing it at a meeting with Reince Priebus at the Trump Towers. Then, at a press conference later on in the afternoon, Trump said signing the pledge was the best way for the Republicans to win the White House.
The best way for the Republicans to win is if I win the nomination and go directly against whoever they happen to put up. And for that reason, I have signed the pledge.
For Republican Party bigwigs, this is good news. They wanted nothing to do with a third-party run that could have turned the 2016 election into a cakewalk for Democrats. But for Trump's rivals for the Republican nomination, on the other hand, this is very, very bad news. Even if they were worried about the damage he'd do as a third-party candidate, the rest of the Republican candidates are now going to have to survive the full wrath of the Donald as he fights to keep his position as the Republican frontrunner. And if there's any one candidate who should be really worried about this, it's probably Jeb Bush. That's because while Trump has been blasting the entire GOP establishment, he's focused most of his attacks on Bush, calling him pretty much every name in the book. Those attacks really heated up this week, though, and now Bush and Trump are in an all-out ad war. First, the Trump campaign hit out with an ad criticizing Bush for supposedly calling illegal immigration an act of love. Take a look.
Yes, they broke the law, but it's not a felony. It's kind of it's an act of love.
Then Bush responded with an ad of his own that accused Trump of being a liberal.
I lived in New York City and Manhattan all my life, okay? So, you know, my views are a little bit different than if I lived in Iowa.
Partial birth abortion.
I'm very pro-choice. I am pro-choice in every respect and as far as it goes.
As far as single payer, it works in Canada. It works incredibly well in Scotland.
Not to be outdone, Trump responded to that ad by releasing another attack ad that accused Bush of being a Clinton lover. Check it out.
We recognize the commitment of someone who has devoted her life to public service. I want to say thank you to both Secretary Clinton and to President Clinton.
What does that make Hillary Clinton to the Bush family? My sister-in-law.
Not as persuasive as that Bush ad, but Trump really has nothing to lose here. By ruling out a third-party run, he's thrown all his chips in with the Republican Party and the Republican base that he's based his campaign around. The bloodbath could just be beginning. Joining me now for more on all this is Mike Papantonio, America's lawyer and host of Ring of Fire Radio. Pap, welcome back.
How are you, Tom?
It's great to see you. First off, Pap, do you believe that Trump is not going to run as a third-party candidate? I mean, that pledge is not legally binding.
That pledge means nothing at all to Donald Trump. This guy has hustled banks, he's hustled major businesses, he's signed his name to damn near everything, and then the next thing you know, he's ignoring it. This means nothing to Donald Trump. And, you know, this food fight that you're describing between two toddlers, what it's telling me about this whole picture, Tom, is that the GOP of the past has usually been characterized as a disciplined, unified, you know, well-coordinated political party, even though they consistently have tried to leave America in a disastrous abyss at times. It's been their discipline, and it's been that skewed vision that's allowed them to at least help create their notion of a dysfunctional democracy, but they've done it with some unity. This food fight that's taking place is really a reaction over, you know, it's going to get worse because, as you pointed out, Donald Trump is now saying, hey, I'm not going to run as a third party. That means all of these nobodies, these absolute nobodies, including Jeb Bush, become more nobodies, and it's scary to him.
Yeah. I find it interesting that the top three Republican candidates right now, Ben Carson, Carly Fiorina, and, of course, Donald Trump, are, at least in the polls, none of them have any political experience at all. What does that tell you about the electorate in general and the Republican electorate in particular?
Well, it doesn't matter to the electorate anymore. It comes down to ideologues, and it really doesn't matter who that ideologue is. Ben Carson's a great example. I remember being on a panel with Ben Carson. It was on a Fox event. And I remember he and I were debating, and it was such a shallow notion of the world. I mean, it was remarkable. The very basic things we were talking about, it started off as a debate about gun violence in the United States. But it was really, what was startling is how little he did know. Look, he's had a major movie made based on his life that portrays him as one of the most gifted surgeons that this country's ever seen. I mean, it's ridiculous. The film took a lot of liberty because with Carson's abilities, the truth is he holds an above average rate of medical malpractice lawsuits, very serious medical lawsuits. Many of these cases, at least 3 or 4, they've been settled. They've been settled for undisclosed amounts of money, and while others are still pending in the courts, there are at least 5 documented cases of malpractice against Carson, all alleging negligence on his part. About 75% of doctors have malpractice claims from one time, but less than 2% of those claims ever lead to any kind of financial payment to the victim. Virtually all of Carson's cases have. So I look at, I take my experience with him, being on that panel and remembering what a shallow, almost just lack of insightful way of thinking this man has. Then I compare, well, yeah, he made it, he became a neurosurgeon. It's one thing to become a neurosurgeon. It's another thing to actually be a successful neurosurgeon. He's been anything but successful. He's been a nightmare. He's been a medical malpractice nightmare. Now he's become a political nightmare as far as political malpractice we see every day.
Right, and we saw the kind of business malpractice that Carly Fiorina inflicted upon Hewlett-Packard. It's been maybe a month and a half or so, I rolled out my conspiracy theory. You and I discussed it at the time, that Trump, who is a peer and a colleague and a friend of the Koch brothers and their bunch, and who has hired Corey, what is it, Lewandowski, I guess is his name, the fellow who for 7 or 8 years worked for the Koch brothers as his campaign manager, that his principal job was to get Jeb Bush out of the way so that John Kasich or Scott Walker, one of the candidates who's willing to grovel to the Koch brothers and the other billionaires, would become the Republican nominee. Over the weeks since I first proposed that, everybody, people have said, oh, that's nonsense. But I still have yet to hear Donald Trump make those really personal, really destructive attacks like he has done against Jeb Bush. I mean, essentially questioning his masculinity against Kasich or Walker. What you think?
Well, he will. It's just a matter of time. He will. Listen. Again, it comes back to this idea. It's a home alone scenario. There's no unity, there's no discipline, there's no vision, there's no cohesiveness. So you have this nut job, Donald Trump, out there doing what he wants to do with impunity. Now he's figured out that Jeb Bush, because he raised $100 million in about 3 weeks, probably is a pretty serious threat to him. He'll start going after these lesser. If I were looking down the panel and I were to say, who do I have to worry about? I'd worry about Jeb. I certainly wouldn't worry about Rick Perry or Cruz or any of these other characters. Kasich even. I mean, so he's doing what he's doing. His moves are very smart, Tom. I mean, as crazy as this guy seems, his moves are very smart. His use of nationalism, dressed up as racism, very smart. He's bringing in all the racists. The neo-Nazi groups are endorsing him. The white supremacist groups are endorsing him, coming out almost daily talking about what a wonderful president Donald Trump would make. In his mind, he doesn't really care. That's good. He'll take whatever he can get. But right now, his target really is Jeb Bush. I mean, and he'll keep wearing away at Jeb Bush. There was a story out that the reason he's doing this is because Jeb, he changed his mind about opening casinos down in South Florida. He goes far beyond that. He is a strategist. If you take a look, as crazy as his talk is, if you look at his strategy, it is fairly elegant. It's very simple. It is nationalism, it's racism, it's close the border, it's dressing it up in ways that he just does it with reckless abandon. And so his attack on Jeb Bush is going to continue because he's the only guy that I'd be worried about in that entire group. He's the only guy I'd be focusing on.
He's the only serious candidate. Do you think that Donald Trump could become America's Silvio Berlusconi?
Well, Donald Trump could certainly become the GOP nominee, which will be a walk into the White House, hopefully for Bernie Sanders or Hillary or Biden, whoever's there at the time. But I mean, it's at some point, it's this rage that's taking place, this rage that's centering around Donald Trump. That's what it's about. It is anti-establishment. It's, by God, I'm mad and I can't take it anymore. That's what he's representing. At some point, rationality does come into the mixture, and they're going to say, we've got this guy. He could be the GOP nominee, and people are going to say, oh my God, what have I done? Yeah. And they're going to realize that's too late at that point.
So Howard Beale for president just doesn't, eventually won't make it. Speaking of support for Trump, polls have found that Republicans support Obama's policies, including health care reform, when they're told that Trump supports them. What should that tell us?
Yeah. Well, it's just the shallow stories. On Ring of Fire, we always, from time to time, about every few weeks, we'll find some video that somebody has done. The one we posted, it's an interesting video. It took place in Australia, where they're talking about how stupid the American electorate is. And they go through asking the typical questions: who's your senator? Can you name one Supreme Court judge? Who won the Civil War? And we can't ignore that is part of it. We have a dumbed-down electorate that's probably more dumbed down than they've been in decades. So, I mean, that kind of answers that question, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Pap, in the 30 seconds we have left, do you think that there's a possibility that Trump could be the Republican nominee?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I absolutely do, because the Republicans will not come to their senses on this. He talks like them. He is one of them, and the way he's approaching it, he absolutely could be the Republican nominee. I really do believe that.
And Reince Priebus has just lost control of the process. This is like a Mary Shelley novel?
Home alone, nobody's in charge. Trump's in charge today. It was the Koch brothers. Now the Trump is in charge of this party.
Fascinating stuff. Mike Papantonio, it is always a pleasure to get your wisdom and thoughts. Thanks so much for dropping by tonight.
Thank you, Tom.